She completed her master's degree in public health from Tulane University in New Orleans and was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nepal as part of her master's program. Very cool. She earned her medical degree from the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry in Rochester, New York. And she completed a residency in psychiatry at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, followed by a fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry from Cambridge Health Alliance in Cambridge, Mass. She is board certified in both psychiatry and child and adolescent psychology. Psychiatry, my apologies. And she is now the clinical director for the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Outpatient Clinic at Maine Medical Center, as well as the PEER program for early psychosis and the Maine Pediatric and Behavioral Health Partnership. So lots of roles. And I was also told she likes to share a fun fact about herself before she starts. I don't know if that's true, but if you want to share a fun fact.
Oh, yeah. I usually make the other presenters to share a fun fact, but I can share.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe I got it wrong.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, my dad was in the Coast Guard, and so he rebuilt a boat, like a 40-foot yawl. And so we spent a year sailing motoring down the Mississippi to Florida and then spent it in the Bahamas. So when I was like 8, 9 years old. So I did not go to school that year. That's pretty awesome.
Wow, that is a fun fact.
That was some serious school refusal I had that year.
Yeah, school avoidance, did you say?
Yes.
That's funny. Well, thank you. And we're happy to have you. And so the floor is yours.
Great. So I'm going to turn to my partner for just a couple of minutes, for Julie Carroll, who works with me on this grant, just to give you guys a very brief understanding about what it is we do. And then I'll start talking about school avoidance and refusal or anything else you guys want to talk about.
Great. Thanks, Amy. So I am Julie Carroll. I'm the project manager for Maine Medical Center, and I work on the Maine Pediatric and Behavioral Health Partnership. So the partnership is a grant with Northern Lights and the state of Maine to expand behavioral health access for kids. And we do that in 2 different ways. One is through trainings. We host monthly trainings with the state. It's on the BH Partners for Me website. I can share that link after. And we also do smaller trainings like this one with you guys, and also lunch and learns with practices or primary care practices in our area. And the second big goal of the grant is provider to provider consultations. So those are on a number of different things, whether it's medication management, treatment recommendation, or diagnostic clarity. Since we started the program in March of 2021, we have done 291 consults, which is awesome. And so we've enrolled Lincoln Health and started to try to strengthen our partnership with the county. And so that Dr. Russ invited us to this meeting to speak to you guys and help you out with some different needs. So we're very happy to be here.
So thank you, Julie. So, and thanks to Annie and Stephanie, also Annie Pat. So, before I go into my spiel and talk about kind of school avoidance and stuff, I don't want to presume that you don't know anything already about school avoidance or anxiety. So do the people on this call feel like you've got that, you're all set, you understand that stuff, and we should talk about something else? Rebecca, you want to do the talk? You could do it, probably.
No, but I sure appreciate your sentiment.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's complicated, but I'm assuming all of you are you in schools? Is everybody like working in a school or have some connection to a school, like school-based health center? Lori's saying no. What do you do, Lori?
I'm a case manager out of the Maine Behavioral Healthcare Office in Damariscotta, and I do have children on my caseload.
Great. All right. So what I did is I just kind of pulled together some slides. I'll be transparent that I pulled them off the Child Mind website because I think they're fabulous. If you ever need mental health information that's like easily palatable and understandable, I recommend you go to the Child Mind Institute because they have millions of dollars and they've been using it to make some really good materials. So anyway, I'm just going to share some slides, work in the Jefferson School. And really, I would like to have a conversation. I don't want to just talk because that's boring. And, have you, as we go through some of these discussion, if you have cases that you've seen, people that you've dealt with, situations you've come up with, I would be happy to stop at any point and we can talk about them. All right, let's see. Let me just pull this up. All right. Oops. I always love doing Zoom and doing presentations at the same time. All right, here we go. Can I share my screen? Yes.
Yes, I did make you a co-host, even though.
Thank you.
It won't work.
All right, so let's make sure it changes. Do you guys just see the one slide? Okay,
Yep.
I can't see it. I cannot see everyone. I can just see a few people. So if you want to speak at any point, just unmute yourself and start talking. So I have to say, in child psychiatry, I would say one of the most challenging behaviors is school refusal. I'd say the second most challenging is selective mutism. I think that's also really hard to deal with. But just to be clear, school refusal is not just like the simple, like a kid doesn't want to go to school. Like my son, I think last week was like, I want a mental health day and I want to stay home. And I was like, well, you haven't had a mental health day all year, so that's fine. That's not school refusal. It's really about kids who are not going to school on a regular basis or have problems staying in school. And so, as you guys probably have known and have seen, I've had people that stopped going to school in 9th grade and are now 21 and like never went back to school. So it can be really significant, and it can be, very disruptive both to the family and to the kid who's, trying to become a fully functioning adult. And it's not obviously the same as playing hooky or wanting to have fun outside of school, as you truly have an aversion to going to school. So kind of like how you distinguish school refusal from just like avoiding of school, it's really based on like the intensity and the impairment of functioning. So like how you want to think about like how long have they been avoiding going to school, how much distress is associated when they go to school, how strongly they're resisting going to school. I've certainly had families where they have to call the police to try to get their kid to go to school, or the kid will jump out of the car when they get to school. Excuse me, and how much it's interfering with their family life. And, you don't have to be not going to school to still have school refusal, because kids can be very creative and inventive about how they avoid school. So maybe they can't get there on time, or they leave early, or they spend a lot of time in the nurse's office, or they keep texting their parents throughout the day that you've got to come pick me up. I can't stay here any longer. There are a lot of reasons to think about why kids aren't going to school. So like, I'm going to talk right now about psychiatric reasons. I'll probably stop the screen or the slides at some point and talk about some other reasons. ADHD is a big one, because I'd say I'm going to put ADHD, learning disabilities, and intellectual challenges together, because sometimes either the family or, even possibly the people at school don't realize that the reason the kid doesn't want to go to school is because school is hard. School is hard. It's embarrassing because maybe they're not learning as fast as their other kids, or they can't grasp the information in the same way, or they're having trouble with reading. Or because, they have ADHD, and so they either can't keep up with tasks, and then they feel behind in their homework, and so they don't want to go to school, or they're having social problems at school. So those I always want to look at when I'm thinking about, is there an academic reason why the kid doesn't want to go to school? Are they having trouble with the actual material? Separation anxiety is a big one. So, obviously that's more of an issue you think of with smaller kids, thinking about preschool, kindergarten, first, second grade, where kids they're scared to be away from their parents. And so that often will present, especially with the little bitty kids, is like, crying, hanging on to, like not wanting to leave. And, I think most schools, preschools, little kids, they are used to that. And they're often pretty good at telling the parents, like, you can't hang around here. Like, you have to say goodbye to your child and go, like, and then they will let you know if their kid's having a problem. And most kids, as soon as the parent leaves, within a minute or two, they're able to kind of go on with their tasks. But that is something to be aware of. Something which is not always clear. It's not like separation anxiety is like a diagnosis, but oftentimes kids don't want to go to school because there's something going on at home that makes them not want to leave. So like they have a depressed parent, for example, or they have a parent with a substance use problem, or there's a reason that they don't want to go to school because they don't want to leave the parent alone. And they can't often articulate that, but that's like driving sometimes why they don't want to leave. Or they have, a younger sibling that they're worried about, or there's something going on at home that they feel like they can't leave. So not, again, like a true separation anxiety, but that's ultimately driving their behavior. Social anxiety is a big one. So, if you don't want to talk in front of other kids, and then you're having to give presentations or like talk about, your project, or you are in a class where they're making you, read lines from Macbeth, like that's going to prevent you from wanting to be in school. That and also, of course, thinking of more general social anxiety where they have trouble with other kids and don't want to be around other kids because it makes them feel anxious. Thinking about generalized anxiety and phobias, obviously I have a lot of stuff on anxiety because anxiety is a big driver of school avoidance. So that's why I'm kind of going into detail about these, but kids that like have generalized anxiety, sometimes it can present as, they've got so many worries it can't get them going in the morning. Sometimes it presents as like, I don't feel like I've done well enough on this. This kind of ties back actually to social anxiety and thinking about performance anxiety, but like, I can't get my work done because it's not written well enough, or it's not going to be as good as it, like that can often drive kids to avoid school also. OCD. So just thinking about OCD, if you're someone who, and OCD often does not present until a little bit later. So it's not something that you have like when you first start school, but as kids develop more OCD behaviors, the rituals may actually interfere with them being able to get to school, or like the fact that they need things to be a certain way and it's not controlled like that at school can get in the way with them going to school. I think depression's probably a little more obvious and commonplace about why that would interfere with school. It could present as like, I can't get out of bed, but it also could, again, present as I can't get my work done. And now I don't want to go to school because I haven't been able to finish what I was supposed to do. Autism. So thinking again about some of the rigidity that goes along with OCD, but because autism also has some similar kind of rigid features to it, but it can make things really challenging when a lot of school, if you have autism and maybe you're a kid that really needs things to be a certain way and school is not that way, or kids don't treat you that way, or the teachers aren't that way. And so that just makes it really challenging to make you want to go to school. I didn't put this on here, but I would include kids that are neuroatypical, people with gender dysphoria, people that in any way have something that makes them a little different perhaps than some of their peers can make it really challenging to go to school. And so I just think that like being clear about what the cause is for the school avoidance is really important, because that's what you're going to get, that's what you're going to go after as far as like finding a treatment and getting them back to school. This is more true with little kids, I would say. Older kids, yes, sometimes they'll say that they're sick, but little kids are notorious for saying that they have headaches or stomach aches. And so they'll either go to the nurse a lot or they won't go to school because they're saying that they're feeling sick. You obviously don't want to overlook if there is a medical issue. I've had plenty of kids where, the parents think they're anxious and force them to go to school, and then they end up having celiac, so they have an actual allergy. But it often can manifest as physical symptoms. Another reason kids may avoid school is if they've been absent for a period of time. So like thinking of kids with chronic health conditions, like that have CF or they have asthma and they end up in the hospital a lot, or sickle cell, and then they go back to school and it just feels like this huge weight of like, how am I ever going to catch up with all this work that I have to do? So, really in any of these conditions, and this is kind of like the mantra about school avoidance, you want to get kids back in school as soon as possible whenever they're avoiding school, because the longer that they're gone, the harder it is to kind of get over that hurdle to go back. So I think I've kind of alluded to this already, but really you have to understand what the problem is. Not all school refusal is the same. And so you have to understand why it is they're refusing school. And that's going to help guide what you do about it. So if the kid's missing school because they have ADHD and they're having trouble in class, your treatment may be, okay, let's figure out, is there a way to lessen the homework so you don't feel overwhelmed? Is there somewhere you can sit in the classroom so you can pay better attention? Can we kind of clue you into what's happening, and that will help you feel more comfortable in school? If somebody's depressed and they have trouble getting up in the morning, maybe the answer is that you have to delay the start of the day a little bit to get people just to be going back into school. The other thing that I haven't talked about yet is there something happening? Like, is there bullying going on at school? Is there, something happening with the teacher at school? Is there, I have a kid that doesn't like to go to school because they feel a lot of pressure to smoke or vape or to smoke marijuana, and it makes them uncomfortable. And so they don't want to go. So again, might be environmental things that are happening that are making them refuse school. So understanding it's important as well. I mean, the main treatment for school refusal is for a lot of things. If you're talking about therapy, is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So really kind of under like teasing apart the thoughts and emotions that are driving the not going to school, helping them understand where those thoughts and feelings come from and kind of teasing them apart so that they can kind of face it. I think and I'll be curious to hear what some of the school professionals think about this, but my mom taught school for 35 years. I have a lot of teachers in my family, so I've thought a lot about school and school issues, but I think there's a balance between making accommodations for kids and having kids not be uncomfortable, because with anxiety in particular, people often, parents don't want their kids to be uncomfortable, and anxiety is uncomfortable. Like you have to be uncomfortable. And so you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So, helping parents really understand that, like, yes, I understand your kid has social anxiety, but there's some treatment we can do for that, but we're probably not going to make it so they're never anxious. And so you have to be okay with that, because really you have to expose them to the thing that makes them anxious in order for them to get over it. And that doesn't mean, again, that it'll be gone 100%. It'll be gone maybe 80% or 85% if you're lucky, but there'll be times that they're still going to be anxious, and they have to learn how to push through that. Because if they go from school to having a job or, whatever in the military or traveling overseas, you're going to have situations where you feel uncomfortable and anxious, and you have to learn how to push through it. So, really it's making them successful for later. I'll be curious to hear what people do at your schools, but, I've done a lot of behavior plans with teachers and with guidance counselors and school principals about exposure therapy and figuring out what is the way that we're going to get the kid back in school. So I had a kid once who was a middle school student who was, her dad was actually here on a Fulbright, so they were from a different country. And she was having a lot of trouble with kind of being in a different place, speaking a different language, although her English was impeccable. And it just kind of manifested into a lot of anxiety. And so she stopped going to school, even though she lived literally right across from the middle school. And so we spent 6 months basically getting her to go to the door, go into the office, go in when nobody else was there, walking through the hallways, having somebody to check in with. And those sound like really small pieces, but me as part of our treatment team and our family, we're thinking, okay, when this Fulbright is over, they're moving to another country and she needs to be able to go to school. So a lot of it was how do we get her trained to be able to be in this uncomfortable environment? So, getting somebody to go into the school, having somebody they check in with, maybe you start off with doing their classroom with a guidance counselor, before they actually start going to the classes. If they have a friend, if there's a friend that they feel comfortable with, maybe being able to pair them with that person for a while, because, really, ultimately the goal is to not have all these accommodations, but, sometimes you really have to be very accommodating in the beginning, and really working up from being there for a class or two until finally attending a full day of school. So I'm going to stop my share now. And then I want to open this up for discussing school refusal, anxiety, whatever you guys would like to talk about. And I'd be curious to hear people's experiences. You can just unmute yourself, Laura.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm late. But one of the things that I starred that I heard you say that I would love some thoughts on how to have those conversations with parents. So what I picked up on was, and I'm a school counselor, is to get your kids back in school, regardless of their anxiety, because keeping them out is only prolonging it and it's not going to get better. Yep. And we had a parent this fall whose daughter, the truancy was horrendous. She never came to school. I think mom was really dependent on her, and she decided to homeschool her in November. And we tried telling her, we said, this, first of all, it's not even diagnosed. And really, you're not doing her any favors. This is only going to get worse. And she decided to homeschool her. So trying to, I agree 100% with what you've said, is you need to be okay with feeling uncomfortable. You have to. It's called life, and you're going to feel uncomfortable a lot. And I think, sometimes teachers, especially elementary, it's a lot of coddling. And it's, I've been K through 5, I've been 6 through 8, and I've really seen this lack of development by the time they come into middle school to high school, it's okay to be uncomfortable. And I guess I'm struggling with how to have that conversation, not only with parents, but with elementary teachers and getting kids ready for the next level.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, there's this idea in psychiatry about the growing edge, which means like you have to be uncomfortable to change, but you can't be so uncomfortable that you can't change, like that you're so flooded you can't do anything. So I often will start presenting things to people that way, saying, okay, so like if you're thinking like in a 0 to 10 scale, like 3 to 4 is what I would call like the growing edge. So, if your kid is like, hysterical and like, can't think straight because they're in school and they're having panic attacks, like that's probably not the growing edge. Like that's probably like, they're like way beyond what you can do. But that doesn't mean that like, we're not going to continue to move towards being at that place. So, helping parents and elementary teachers know like life is going to be uncomfortable. There are going to be things, like, not to bring politics into things right now, but like, look at what's happening in Ukraine. Like there are some like extremely resilient people there that like, none of us ever have to go through anything like that and hopefully never will. But like, I think that you have to be prepared for things to be challenging at times. And you don't prepare your kids to be challenged by not letting them ever feel uncomfortable. So that's usually where I'll start, like, yes, we want you to be happy in school, and we want you to enjoy going to school, but sometimes you're not going to, and that's okay. That's not a problem. Like sometimes you're not going to get your homework done on time and you're going to get, a bad grade, but that's going to teach you later to, do the things you need to do when you have a job, So Stephanie, do you want to say something?
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I just wonder sometimes if parents, right, that they don't have those skills to coach their children through that. So then they begin avoiding as well. And
Yeah.
so it kind of becomes this parallel process. And so so that's just an observation or a thought. And so with that particular parent, it became the path of least resistance to homeschool. But is that just another form of avoidance? Yeah.
Well, anxious kids often have anxious parents. So like, so then the parents are anxious because the kid is anxious and then like nobody's doing well. And so like, we'll all just avoid everything and just stay home. I do often tell people real life stories of kids that I've seen. I mean, I can think of a kid who, was probably a little, not autistic, but definitely was a little neuroatypical, and didn't like go to school. School wasn't a comfortable place for him. Which is not great. Like you would like school to be a comfortable place, but instead of trying to figure out a solution that worked for him, literally he stopped going to school in 8th grade. And when I saw him, he was 22 and he still had an 8th grade education. And now his parents were sad because like he was living in their basement and they couldn't get him out of his basement because like, I remember we spent an entire year, I was living in the South at the time. We spent an entire year getting him so that he could go through the drive-through at Chick-fil-A and like place an order, so like I sometimes will tell parents these stories and I'm like, look, I know this is challenging right now, but you don't want it to get to the place that like your kid's never leaving your house either. Rebecca?
So yeah, that's such a great example of like how it can go, right? And such the perfect, or just, I always think of it like, oh my gosh, you don't want to go down that road. Like, let's turn this around. One thing that you said that I was feeling a little jealous of was when you said the treatment team, because I was like, oh, what would be great if you have,
Oops.
if you have a student who's struggling with truancy, there's a role really for everybody, but what tends to happen in my experience is there's not somebody whose job it is to coordinate everybody. It's just this thing that's like all these people with all this work to do who are supposed to try and coordinate with one another. So I remember my husband worked in Chicago public schools as a teacher for about 6 years. And it was interesting because he said they had a very strict and clear truancy policy of what they would do after 2 absences, after 4 absences, starting with a teacher call home. And next would be a teacher meeting with the parent and the student, and it would go, and then it would include the principal, and then there would be letters, certified letters, all the way up to like, you're going to court because you're neglecting your child up in education. But one of the things that I notice is that it's just really hard to get that coordination, which is what the child and family often desperately need, right? Because they're a little lost. They're not able, usually the parent's not able to direct that. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that what you're describing too, like, I think would first of all, it gets attention to the problem, right? Like you notice that the kid's missing days. It was interesting. I don't know if this is a state policy or not, but I remember like the last place I lived, I think if you missed more than 7 days of school, you would actually fail the year unless you had like, some kind of accommodations or a 504 or something like that, which certainly meant that everyone pays attention if you're missing school. That did not mean, these kids the girl that I was just describing lived across the middle school, lived in that state. So like she didn't fail the year. It just meant that we knew that it was a problem we had to fix or like do something about. But, certainly I think if there's a very strict plan, then people know, okay, we have to pay attention to this problem. As long, I think on the other side that you're actually addressing the right problem and not just saying it's because you don't want to go to school. Which I'm not saying, Rebecca, you're saying, I'm just.
Well, and I guess I'm sitting here thinking about all the clinical things that you want to help them do, right? You want to help with that exposure. You want to help with like, it's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel anxiety, but I can't do all the things, right? I can't coordinate like, okay, we're going to go visit this place and we're going to have you come this many days and I'm going to call all these people. It's just not feasible with my schedule. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's almost like everybody taking a piece and take the right piece, make sure you're working on the right piece so that to me, then the kid, the student, is going to get all the things they need. It's just not all from one person.
Yeah. I think that when I've been involved in these situations, I usually either will have a meeting with the parents and we outline, if I can't get the school on to be part of the meeting, which usually the schools will, but like sometimes it's not possible for whatever reason, like how we're going to address the problem, like, who, go to the school, who you're going to identify as the point person, who's going to be the person who can like help you think through, these various options. But I think it really works best if you do it with the family and the school. So everyone like knows, and the kid, to be honest. So everybody knows that you're on the same page. Everybody, including the kid, knows that the goal is you're going to be back in school full time. And then you can all take a piece. But yeah, I agree, Rebecca, it's challenging because we're all busy. And so like to manage this also is difficult. I do feel like the parents are often the ones that have the most at stake to get the kid back in school. So sometimes they end up being just the natural ringleaders of it, which back to the point you were talking about earlier is challenging if the parent also is avoiding the problem. I did have a kid, just to say, I have had kids that did do homeschooling because of school avoidance and anxiety. I can think of one in particular that I think she dropped out in sophomore year, very smart kid. She was all AP track and, but it took us probably 2 years of treatment to get her the place that she actually, and she's on, on medication. She went to a psychologist for CBT. But by the end of that time period, she actually went off to college, and I didn't think that would ever happen. So just to say that there are sometimes cases where they really do have to pull back from school for a while, but most kids, that's not true. I don't think. Somebody else? RB?
Sorry. Oh, go ahead, Rachel. I just was going to say there's something in the chat too, but go ahead, Rachel.
You can
first.
bring that up.
Okay. So Leslie mentioned there is a state law that guides this under what's considered educational neglect. So, and I don't know, Leslie, don't want to put you on the spot, but I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that, given your role with Healthy Kids.
Not, I don't need to say a lot, except
Okay.
that there is a law that governs that and what schools are required to do, so that if somebody, anybody in the schools are are reporting that, the very first thing is that the school has to come together with whatever group it is and come up with a plan, just as you were describing before, and begin to work on that plan. Anyway, that's.
Do you think that's underreported? Just curious, or do you get that breakdown in your statistics?
You know
of-
what? So we've
Edu-
asked for it, and OCFS does not give us that breakout.
That's because that would be interesting.
It would
to
be, it
see
would be,
It's a specific,
anyway.
yeah.
But there's more that can be read about it, and I don't want to take up
Okay.
time here. I'm happy to send something to you, and you can send it out if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my experience, unfortunately, and I think, and it's so much is dependent on the worker, like the DHHS worker that you get. I mean, I have a kid now who's 11 who basically can't read because he has missed so much school, or when he goes to school, he sleeps through the day. And like, he's got a very good guidance counselor. The school's really on top of it. Mom works nights. And so he's basically up all night, or he's like wandering the streets at 11, none of which is good. And so we've made so many reports to DHS and nothing has happened. Like, he continues to like either not go to school or go to school and sleep through the day. And so I've been frustrated by that, but I've also had, times where they've been very helpful. I'd say as a psychiatrist, I have often, not right now because there's no beds anywhere, but I would think of school refusal as a psychiatric emergency and would put people in the hospital sometimes. Like, okay, you've not been to school in 3 weeks. We have to break the cycle. And, sometimes because it's your job, like your job when you're a kid is to go to school. And if you can't go to school and we can't figure out why you're not going to school, we may have to put you in the hospital to figure it out.
I think things are a lot different in the high school level because that law does not go past, I think, 12-year-olds, even in the older middle school. Like, they're like, oh, they're 13, doesn't matter, and it's obviously it does matter, but our hands were tied as a school. But I noticed like having basically 2 full-time social workers, 2.1 at a school of about 600 people, that there's no way, that we can keep track of all this. I was just saying the other day, like, we need a social worker just for the truant, anxious kids and the ones who are off using drugs instead of being at school, because they have so many issues, but they usually only come to us when they're like just about to drop out. And our options at that point are so limited. And it feels like, I don't know if this is actuality, I think Eric's on, but it feels like we lose the kid, like at least a kid every week, for dropping out, for trying to do homeschooling, for whatever. And it's it feels kind of hopeless at times, At the same time, like, I had a great meeting today, parents, kid came up with a plan, a reentry plan, but there's a lot of components that, like, I think Rebecca was saying, there's limited things that we can do with it. And that's frustrating because I think we all, I don't know, all the colleagues I know, we understand why kids stay home from school. We understand the components of that, but we don't have the resources to really step in and make the changes. And of course, there's nobody to refer them to for the kind of care that you could provide, Dr. Mayhew. Unless you want to, like, give us your cell number.
Yeah. And even when I'm involved, I can't always solve it. So, I'm thinking of other kids I've seen, like I've got a girl who's 17 now, and she's basically been intermittently not going to school since freshman year. Her reason, I would say, is because she's got 2 siblings that are very successful in school and like were gifted. She's also was in the gifted program, but she just felt so much pressure to like be something. And so that and I think there's a lot of pressure from her family to, like that they very really highly value education and like you've got to do really well. And she just she decided to go on strike and like just stopped going. And now she's 17 and she, finally has been able to admit to some of this kind of dynamics that have been happening in her family. And so, my job right now is to convince her, look, it's okay. You're 17, you're not going to go back and start 9th grade again. Let's just do the high set and like move on to college because you're smart enough, you're going to be okay. But sometimes with school refusal, that I feel is the ultimate solution. I've got a lot of kids that for whatever reason have dropped out of school or are not finishing school and being like, okay, let's not let this, the fact you've avoided school for the past 2 years define your life. Like you're not a failure because you couldn't, like, we just have to start where we are and move forward. Like, you know, get you to get, you know, if you can get some credits to pay, to go back into school, great. If you can't, like, can we get you your diploma and you can work on the next step and like figure out why you were stopping school. So and I know that, I mean, I've had conversations with guidance counselor friends of mine about, you know, having that conversation, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are having, that, you know, don't let the fact that this part of your life has been unsuccessful define you. You know, I mean, I think we all recognize, or at least in my estimation, I don't know if the HiSET is different, but the GED definitely is not the same as having a high school diploma, like as far as what your options are, but, you know, like also not punishing kids for not being able to do what they need to do to get their diploma. Have you guys found that to be true? I mean, that was always my experience, but I don't know if that's still true with the change to the HiSET.
I can speak personally about this conversation. My husband committed suicide in 2011, and I had a daughter that was really struggling in high school. We had it where she could flip a card on her desk and just leave class. She had major panic attacks. Just could not function at school. And I kept trying to be that tough love mom and, you know, really push her through it. And she was just struggling. I was hurting her. I wasn't helping her. And I took her out of school and tried to homeschool her. But it was hard at the school because, of course, everyone wants to keep the kids in school. But we all have to really look at it. And I guess that really changed my perspective as being a school nurse. To what degree and what, you know, way you manage it, because you are going to hurt that child sometimes more than you're helping them when you're putting all this pressure on them. Like, you know, just do it. Like, you can do this, you know, and no, she couldn't do it. And so she did do the HiSET, graduated top in her class. And it was so wonderful for her. Like, she just did amazing. She came out, she spoke at her graduation in front of standing only crowd. It was so packed. And her sisters and I were just bawling because it was just amazing that she could do that. And she's gone on, as far as like working, she works for Mobius and she's going to school for a degree in behavioral health. She's gotten scholarships. So there is hope for these students. So definitely we need to be letting them know, like, this isn't the end of the world. There's definitely much more that you can do in your life, and try to build them up because the struggles are real.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I mean, I think that really speaks to the point that I was talking to earlier in a much more profound way than I was, that, you know, like sometimes kids can't do it. Like you can't, you know, like this idea of the growing edge, that you push them if they can handle it, but if they can't handle it, so at some point you can't keep pushing. You have to make another plan. And giving people the ability to like, not like, you know, because I think there's a lot of stigma about quote unquote dropping out of high school or not getting your diploma, and like being able to say, it's okay, we're going to, you know, we'll figure out another plan, you know, that's based on where you're at now. So really, thank you for sharing that story.
You're welcome.
Can I just go back to what Stephanie had mentioned? Because, you know, I personally also have had an experience where my daughter's school did a great, you know, they created the 504 and she's now thriving. She's 21. But they had to restructure her schedule. But what Stephanie was saying is what I'm experiencing as a community navigator. You know, one story just recently is a young man, 15 years old, major truancy, but they're dealing with some homelessness issues and some substance misuse issues. And he's trying to get money in ways that could help his family that probably are not legal. But like Rebecca was saying, I don't know who I turn to. I don't want to, you know, I see what workload she has, you know, I don't want to call her and say, hey, just so you know, this is going on. But so there really does need to be like this, because I know mom, what Stephanie was saying, mom is not equipped to be able to even help us. She's worried about a home and she's worried about court dates now for her son. So, you know, it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So I think that, you know, as a community, I would love to see something across the board for folks like myself that know where to go. Who do I contact? to get the ball rolling, because what's happening is our police departments, which I work closely with, it's not in their realm. They certainly will support, but unfortunately they end up getting it when they're breaking into cars to try to get money for homes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just to say, Karen Ann, like I feel like there's a position that would be utilized full time. You know, I think there's a position in the school. I know truancy officer and everybody thinks police, but I don't, it seems like there's a position in a school if this is happening, and they would be busy full time if they, and again, it isn't about, oh, never mind, they're fine, I don't need to work with them. Well, of course, but plug me in to do my part, right, of helping them with, right, the exposure and
Everybody has that
the
part. I
CBT
agree.
and yeah.
I agree.
And so I don't know, I just hear these conversations and I think sometimes it's like there needs to be another position, right? If a school's gotten to a certain point, and I don't know, I think it just isn't something that is in place now, right? Like I think, and so I like thinking of what would that position be? What would the job description be, but I think it would be life-changing as far as helping kids not drop out and helping families and helping sort of people who have expertise tap in and use their expertise instead of all this time trying to connect all the dots and you know what I mean? Like, it seems like it can get, sometimes that can get a little lost where you're just making phone calls or waiting for a phone call back instead of helping with the treatment.
So there was one of the places that I lived at one point. They had a collaboration between the police department, the hospital, kind of like the psychiatric department, basically at the hospital, and the after school program. So like there was boys and girls clubs in the community, and that we would meet every other week. And it was in Cambridge, so it's an urban place, but it's in some ways a very small city because like people know each other and like know it, but like people would have identified like these are the kids or these are the families that are and then we would talk about like what the struggle was, and so like is it the fact they don't have enough money, and so like the kid doesn't is it going to school because of that, or is it because they're involved in a gang, or is it because mom's drinking, or like whatever the thing was. And then we would try to figure out like how do we fix that, like is there a way that we as a group can figure out like which, because it was like 3 prongs basically, like which prong would be the best suited. And the after school programs worked closely with the schools. And so then we would figure out, like, it was a great program. I mean, it's, you have to have the community partnership to do that, but it was really helpful to be able to kind of like really think about like, what is the problem driving why this kid's not showing up in school? I just saw somebody said there was a program like that in New York. Yeah, that would be great. I don't know how to create that, but that would be really awesome.
Or even, like I was saying, just another social worker. Like, even if you just had one social worker that was dedicated to that, that's our wheelhouse to connect people to services and to figure out problems and systems. So, but you need a full-time person for it, like Rebecca said.
Right. I just wanted to recognize 2 things that somebody put in the chats. You're right. I didn't put PTSD on there, which obviously is a huge thing. We could have a whole talk about PTSD and school avoidance, but somebody mentioned substance use, and then somebody else was talking about substance use in Lincoln County. So I'm curious, what do you guys see up there, and how is that influencing what kids are doing?
They are working on trying to get something established for youth. I actually just came from a meeting this morning for Lincoln County. It's just a matter of, again, with every other industry, finding folks to take these positions. So
Who is that through, Karen Ann?
Through ARC.
Oh, good. I hadn't heard that yet.
Yeah.
What are the substances kids are doing up there? Marijuana. What else?
Marijuana, alcohol. I've heard kids talk about Coke in the schools, acid. Yeah, Eric, you probably know.
See at the high school or something?
Oh, you're on mute. Okay.
No, I was gathering my thoughts. vaping, high intensity THC and nicotine was the single greatest public health crisis facing our kids before COVID. The use has gotten younger and younger. The flavored nicotine ban, I think, is the flavored tobacco ban, I think, is a really important thing. It has been a real stepping stone for a lot of kids. But in the community, that's at least what I've been seeing over the last 6 years in Lincoln Academy's Health Center. But in the community, as an EMT in the community, yeah, energy drinks, right on, Marilyn. Yeah, for sure. Energy drinks as well. The peak and the crash. What we're seeing are symptoms of the peak and the crash, and the anxiety and the crash that comes along with it afterwards. But in the community, I worked as an EMT for the last 20 years as well. And there's coke, there's crack, there's, meth is creeping in places. And never mind what opiates have done to the community. I mean, that I can't even, I had to start somewhere else. And so it's a tough spot. But one of the things that I've seen is that students look at family members who have been on narcotics, opiates, have taken methadone and have stepped down and been successful. And if they can just smoke a couple of joints a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then things are calm at home. Things are cool at home. And I think a lot of teens see that as, well, this is medicine. And therefore it's relatively harmless if I take it now. And when you add on to the myopathy of a teen, we went in Maine, we went from normalizing medicinal use to condoning recreational use in a pretty short period of time. And I think that teens are looking at it through that lens, and I don't blame them. They've got all kinds of ACEs scores. They've got all kinds of things that they want to, that any person would want to step back from and escape from at times. And yet the normalizing through the couple of generations, but really the leading cause of death in the state of Maine has been drug overdose since 2004.
Wow, I know that.
So now they're coming up to their senior year, so to speak. And when we look at what kids are growing up with as a society in Maine, that's been a lot of what I've seen. And it's just this person's opinion. But there's that mix. Condoning has two things, right? Condoning teaches in two ways: I'm not saying something or actively ignoring something. And if a teen is going to soak up all of those social cues, and if life is calmer with a certain amount of drug use compared to another amount of drug use, it can't be that bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks for hearing me out.
Yeah, I mean, with my work with the early psychosis program, I talk about marijuana every single day, like several times a day usually. And I often am starting with educating parents and teenagers about, marijuana 20, 30 years ago was 4% THC. And now if you go to the medicinal shops, it's like 70 to 90% THC. And the fact that the medicinal shops are less regulated than the recreational shops. And then of course I talk a lot about like psychosis and heavy THC use, because I'm seeing kids that are already been psychotic. I mean, today I had a conversation. I'm like, could you please stop smoking marijuana every day? Because you've already had a psychotic episode. We don't really know how much your brain has recovered, and you're only 18 years old. And like, you're kind of putting yourself in a path that it's going to be hard to get off of. But yeah, I mean, I hear everything you're saying, Eric, about like the ACEs and so on too. And I think it's challenging, number one, when your parents have been using, like you're saying, and you're like, well, I'm not doing that thing. But, I do try to get people to, I'm a psychiatrist, so I prescribe medication a lot of times, not always, but, and I say, look, the drugs, the substances you're using to deal with your anxiety are not teaching you how to deal with your anxiety. They're teaching you how to be numb. And that's not a lesson that's going to get you anywhere. Because if you can't smoke marijuana on the job, you're going to be really anxious and not know what to do with it. But yeah.
I just want to say hallelujah if there's actually going to be some possibilities for substance abuse treatment for young people, because boy, is it hard when I got someone sitting right here and they want treatment, they want to get better, and they want to not do this, and they're, you know, to be able to have something that they're going to be able to follow up on and follow through on would really be amazing. The other thing that I think is really interesting is how the kids know, well, they know the ones who use alcohol and drugs, and they know who doesn't. And they at least from where I'm sitting, it seems like, well, they don't do that, so I only see them at school, but we're friends at school, but they don't do that, so I don't ever see them socially. It's like there's this understanding of like people who do it and who don't. I don't know, it's different than when I was in school, where it was like, I think there was more peer pressure, where sometimes I experienced like, wow, I've never seen anybody like judging somebody's choice of whether they're doing it or not. It's just, well, if I use, I want to hang out with people who use, right? Like that's who I want to socialize with. I just thought that was interesting. I found that to be an interesting aspect here.
So there is, just to share with folks, there is a outpatient program through Maine Behavioral Health Care in Rockland called Embark. That is their substance abuse program that does take referrals for adolescents. So it might not help folks kind of near Wiscasset, but Rebecca, Waldoboro, you know,
Right. I think the last I heard that was like telehealth, or it was limited.
They were
a
only
couple of
offering-
times the person just didn't follow through. So
okay,
that's all.
So,
So the couple times
yeah.
that I've tried to make that connection.
Okay, so it's a potential resource. Whether they can offer what's going to work for that patient, that student, is another story, but it's a possibility to seek out or inquire more. But back to ARC, having something in town would be lovely. So, and they're a part of Maine Health now, so that's nice. Well, they've always been part of Midcoast. So, all right. So, I noticed that where, can you type that? Okay, yes, Rachel, Embark. So I know we're coming to the end of our time together. I know, so we have about 3 minutes. I don't know if we have any last minute thoughts, comments, or Rachel, I don't have the actual contact information, like the phone number, but it's Embark. If you did MBH Rockland is really.
Is it EMBARC or K or?
EM, it's all lowercase. I'm sorry. It's EMBARK.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think Annie Pat has her hand raised.
Oh yes, please go ahead, Annie Pat.
Well, yeah, since you can't see my face, I would be interacting a little bit more. But yes, thank you, Dr. Mayhew. That was really, really helpful, I think, for me and hopefully for school folks too. I think that we could probably have lots of conversations like this, and I'll look for the group too to provide feedback to Stephanie and Brooke and I about if you would like Dr. Mayhew to come again on a different topic or other questions you might have. I think she continues to be a willing resource for us. And a couple other things I wanted to remind folks that we do have our next meeting, which is again the first Wednesday of the month, same time, 3:30, and Brandy Brown, I think Brown is the last name.
Brandy Brown.
From the Gender Clinic is going to be joining us to talk about what's happening there at Barbara Bush and the Gender Clinic. So excited about that. Some of you also know that we have a partnership right now with the Lincoln Theater in Damariscotta to be showing the film Dear Evan Hansen on May 18th. And so I've worked with several of the high schools, so Lincoln, Boothbay, and Madonic are going to hopefully send some kids to a showing in the morning at the Lincoln Theater, and then we're going to also have a community showing that's free in the evening. And I will send some information when I send the recording with the trailer, etc. But it's a really powerful story, actually, about high school isolation. There's a serious conversation about suicide as well, but it's also a very uplifting story. And so I invite you to consider sending kiddos or joining us in that evening presentation as well. Brooke, too, if you could just remind folks about the NAMI training coming up too, because I want to make sure people get to that if they can.
Yeah, of course. I've been working with Crystal's team here. I think she's still on very closely to bring a youth mental health first aid Zoom training to our Lincoln County school staff. So that will be on April 25th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Like I said, it's over Zoom. So if you are interested, I know there's a bunch of school staff on here, please feel free to reach out to me. I can send over that link, and I'll be sending out a reminder too in the next couple of days to the school staff group that I've been communicating with. So definitely worth looking into.
Thanks, Brooke.
Yeah, and thanks, Crystal. She said we're excited to have folks join us for the youth mental health first aid training. So actually we need 10 folks to run. We have about 8 registered. So we just need 2 more. And that is all.
Right.
Brooke, when is the training? Sorry. When is the training, Brooke?
April 25th. I believe that's a Monday.
Yeah.
And we can include that too, Rachel, in our wrap-up email so you guys have all this information.
Yep.
And I see other thank yous in the chat again, so really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I always learn, I think, as much or more as what I teach when I do these things. So I've also learned a fair amount from you also. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. May.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayo.
Always
Thank you,
great,
Julie.
always great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.